Definitely don't need duplicates. What are you doing with duplicates? I'm just kidding, guys. The idea that you just owned less and you kind of exited a commercial lifestyle. So you stopped doing things that were very typical of a consumeristic lifestyle and you just owned less. Hey there, my handsome and pretty little Cobras, and welcome back to the Cobra's Nest. For those of you who are new, my name is Mignon Cobra and I make minimalism videos. Today's minimalism video is actually going to be a subscriber request, and the subscriber was asking, is there any minimalism aesthetic or minimalism things about minimalism that just didn't work out for me and how I got around that? So yes, that's something I'm going to be talking about. So without further ado, let's just get to the video. Let's get it. Let's go. Woo. So the subscriber was asking, like, they really like color, and how did I kind of get around this idea that in minimalism there isn't a lot of color? And I think that's a really good question and a very valid question. That's one that I actually struggled with myself personally in previous years. So let's give a little bit of background information where I've come with my colorway. When I first started off minimalism, which was back in, I want to say 2015 or 2014. At the time, minimalism was more of as the lifestyle, was more of a theology. It wasn't really this aesthetic lifestyle that it's become now, almost 7 years later. At the time, it was this idea of, I would almost say akin to the Japanese minimalism of owning very little. That's kind of the aesthetic that it was at the time. It actually had no aesthetic. It was the idea that you just owned less and you kind of exited a commercial lifestyle. So you stopped doing things that were very typical of a consumeristic lifestyle and you just owned less, which was really freeing at the time, because for me, I was coming from a place of being very consumeristic. So just owning less in itself was great. There were no major other guidelines. There was one though, there was the no duplicate rule, which absolutely drove me insane, but more on that later. So in terms of like the colorway, as I tried to figure out more of what a good minimalist look looked like, as I mentioned at the time when I would Google these things, the only thing I could really find was like Japanese minimalism, which, don't get me wrong, is beautiful and still part of my aesthetic, that wabi-sabi type of vibe. So it was literally like a cup in a room. There was not much emphasis on the color. I guess maybe like Tao colors, like Taoism colors, Zen colors, so a lot of green, a lot of gray, a lot of black. Not very typical of what's the beige aesthetic as we know it today. So for me, I was kind of like, I just need to own less. And the thing about owning less is once you get to a very small amount of things pair better when they're of a similar color. And I had just learned, or I'd heard, that black matches with black. So I was like, let's just be practical and just buy black. It was purely me just inventing things out of thin air. There were no guidelines for color in minimalism at the time. So I just wore a lot of black. And I did that for about 2 years. And then I got kind of sick of it. And I think a lot of minimalists could resonate with this. I think a lot of minimalists have mentioned they got sick and tired of the monochrome, the black and the white aesthetic after like a year or two. It's a fun experiment, but I don't know how sustainable it is in terms of color. And around that time, minimalism started picking up, and I was thinking of a different colorway. And actually, I tried the all pink colorway because I was like, all black works. Let's try all pink. So I did all pink, and it didn't last very long. I don't think it lasted more than a year before I was like, it's not a very... I don't know, it just didn't work out for me. As great as I thought it would be to have all pink, it just didn't work. I guess in some ways, it wasn't until like I later discovered the Korean beige minimal colorway of like all browns. I was like, wow, that's really pretty. And I went for that, and I've been rocking that I think for about like 2 years, almost going on 3 years now. What I want to say is I actually felt a lot of pressure as a content creator, as a minimalist. I remember being told in some business tip that you need to look like your niche, and I realized that I didn't look like my niche. When I wore all black, that didn't really look a lot like the niche of like minimalists. I think a lot of minimalists have very like earthy tones, and I don't like earthy tones. I mean, I understand that beige would be considered an earth tone, but I mean like people were wearing like, I don't know, like deep brown and like green and like olive. And I was like, this looks like naturey vibes. Like, I don't like it. It's not for me. I'm more of a sea girl, so for me, I want like chic and effortless, so like black kind of fit. But if you guys know this minimalist, her name is the Afro Minimalist. She actually does a TED Talk talking about how colorway of minimalism is very anglophone in the sense that it's very like Eurocentric. Those beige colorways that we have come to know are actually characteristic of the Eurocentric thought process. And so she wears a lot of what she considers African colors. So she wears a lot of reds and patterns. So if that's something that you'd like to check out, you could definitely check her out. Her name is the Afro Minimalist. I think Christine is her name. And she wears a lot of red. So if you feel like you want to wear a lot of color, well, take some inspiration from her. I think it's beautiful. I think it's lovely. And the thing that I want to mention is that at the end of the day, minimalism is just a tool for you to do you, for you to live your best life. And it's constantly changing. I think that's something that maybe is not emphasized enough in the minimalism community. Everyone makes it seem like the end goal is to reach this minimalism aesthetic. It's not. It's constantly evolving. It's constantly constantly changing. I have been following certain minimalists for a period of time. I'm not going to mention them because obviously I don't want to talk about other minimalists behind their back, but I've seen their style change throughout the years. Sometimes they would wear, like for a certain couple years, they would wear a certain type of aesthetic, then they went baggier, and then when they got tired of baggy, they were more fitted. And you wonder, like,
isn't that just another form of consumption? Like, always changing?
Well, yes and no. It's a slower form of consumption, I would say. It's a more intentional form of consumption, because I think that human nature, we are always growing and we're always evolving. That's the Zen principle. If you're just stagnant and you never change and you never grow, you're essentially dead. At least that's the Zen principle. Things that do not grow are dead. So I think it's good for us to change, but it can be in a slow way. Like our pieces, we can donate it, we can recycle it, we can upcycle it, we can give it a second life, we can pass it on to other people, and we can buy intentionally. We can buy from secondhand shops, we can also get from donation centers. These things don't have to come in a consumeristic way. It doesn't have to only be from like buying and chucking, this type of cycle. There are other more sustainable practices that you can do to implement having a rotation of items. A minimalist, I think, that does this very beautifully. Her name is She's French, a good close friend of mine. She does a lot of these. She has an extremely minimal capsule wardrobe, and she does give a lot of tips and tricks. If you want to check out her channel, I highly recommend it. But yeah, there's a lot of sustainable ways that you can change your style and change your aesthetic. And the other thing, coming back to the color. So what I'm trying to say is it should not be about the color that dictates your minimalism. It should not be about the number of items that you have that dictates your minimalism. It should not be about following the minimalism crowd that dictates your minimalism. I felt a lot of pressure in that, and I really wouldn't wish that for other people. Sometimes I do sometimes wonder, like, why can't I just be myself? And I'll give a good example of that. For me, an aesthetic that I think is very beautiful and really aesthetic is the wave girl aesthetic. And if you guys don't really know what that is, that's like the second gen rich Chinese girl look. I think that aesthetic just brings me life, and was something that I tried to follow a lot in my like black aesthetic. I tried to wear more form-fitted clothing. I really like that aesthetic. But would anybody ever look at that aesthetic and say, oh yeah, that's minimalistic? Probably not. It's not very minimalistic. It's a very decadent maximalist aesthetic, but I like it. And I've come to the crossroad where I realize that at the end of the day, you have to live your life for yourself, and that's something that I have practiced. I have to live for me. As much as I'd like to be, you know, a good influencer, a good role model, a good minimalist role model, at the end of the day, I have to be true to myself. And it's actually always benefited me every time I was authentic to myself. I would indulge myself in certain things. Like another example of that would be makeup. If I was a good minimalist, I would not be wearing makeup, because before me, I never saw any other minimalist wear makeup. I was the only person. I remember this was a couple, maybe I want to say like 5 years ago. I decluttered all of my makeup to try to be a good minimalist. I even made videos on it being like, you know what, like my March no makeup. I didn't wear makeup for 2 years and I was miserable. I absolutely hated it. And I realized between continuing to being a good minimalist or after just living my true authentic life, I would forfeit being a minimalist just to live my true and authentic life. And it turns out there's actually a lot of people now. There's a whole wave of minimalist makeup content. You know, even there's the whole brand, you know, Merit is about minimalist makeup. What I'm trying to say is at the end of the day, you have to be authentic and true to yourself. If you want to be the colorful minimalist, you should definitely be the colorful minimalist, because, and I don't want to get too religious, but that's God's purpose for you. If it calls you that deep inside of your soul where you feel a certain sense of conflict, you already have your answer. If you feel that truly strong about something, that's the answer. When I felt that sense of cognitive dissonance about my makeup, I knew that was the answer. I couldn't give up something that called my soul that way. So I was like, yeah, you know what, screw it. I'm gonna keep wearing makeup. I'm gonna be the makeup minimalist, and I don't care who feels a certain kind of way about it. Another thing that I could say is like my love for luxury is also very minimalism faux pas. You can't like that stuff. You have to quit consumerism, and that includes
luxury. Luxury is the epitome of hyperconsumption.
I'd have to say no. I disagree with that, and I would give the example of Hermes. Hermes is considered the most lusted after luxury brand, and they make their bags by hand. That's pretty sustainable to me. So I know a lot of people might argue, well, you know what, the luxury practices are terrible and the conditions. There's a lot of terrible living conditions and work practices and a lot of greenwashing that you see. I'm pretty sure a lot of people's own jobs are just as equally destroying to the environment. Like, we can all just sit here and point fingers, you know, like, where does it end? So at the end of the day, you just have to stick to your guns and stick to yourself, be authentic, and if it sits right with you and you know you better than anybody else, you really don't need to worry. And by that same flip coin, if you don't want to be colorful, you don't have to be colorful. You can embrace this look and then try it out, see if you like it. And if you find that you don't like it, then leave it. I mean,
no one had a gun to my head saying, Natalie, you have to keep being an extreme black wearing capsule war minimalist or everyone's gonna leave you.
I was like, all right, then I guess they're all gonna have to leave because I can't live like this. Well, yes, I want to talk quickly about some other minimal aesthetics that just didn't work out for me, and that's the duplicate rule. The duplicate rule was one that was a little too extreme for my liking. I'm okay with having duplicates. Sometimes some duplicates do have some overlap and sometimes they don't, and I'm okay with that. And I'm okay with having multiples of things. I'm okay with having multiple shirts, multiple bags, multiple shoes. I try to be minimalistic in the things that I own, but I just don't hit myself over the head with it anymore. I'm done trying to be a perfect minimalist. It's just not healthy. It's not the way minimalism was supposed to be used. Granted, I think that if you're a beginner, these are awesome tips. Yeah, you definitely don't need duplicates. What are you doing with duplicates? I'm just kidding, guys. But as you become a more seasoned veteran in the field, you realize, you know what? I make the rules now. I'm in control. Anyway, I hope that this really helped anybody else out. Cognitive that's shout out to the subscriber. Thank you so much for having taken the time to ask this question. Wonderful, beautiful question. I fully enjoyed talking about this, so thank you. All right, thank you for having watched, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching. Bye.